Hello there. Yeah, we're doing my annual Game of the Year awards. My version. I'm pretty cynical when it comes to awards, and I can't do one of these without talking a little bit about how I basically don't think there is or exists like a good award show in a lot of ways. And that's why it takes me so long to get through this. This is actually my second attempt to do this, so you'll have to bear with me a little bit. I'm going to talk about what I enjoyed, what I played a lot of, and what I think deserves recognition. And I'm also going to talk about some of the games that I played that I enjoyed that everyone else enjoyed. Like, I don't want to come across as a contrarian. I guess I'm going to start with Balatro because I was the first person to cover Balatro before it had come out, before it even had like a Next Fest demo kind of thing going on. And I really liked Balatro. I always super liked Balatro. I thought it was always a really excellent game, and I'm very happy that the devs have like found their audience, and they did find it. I think Balatro has basically made it in like a mainstream. Like, if they're up for Game of the Year, you know, they're being recognized by the mainstream. I have to underline this at least 3 or 4 times. I think Balatro is an amazing game. Okay, I want to show some recognition to other drafting games that came out this year. I think that there are other amazing games that came out this year that did not receive even a fraction of that recognition. But I wanted to talk about Slice and Dice because that came out on Steam this year. So I guess you could say it's officially out. It's a 1.0. It was released. This is a game that's been in development for a very long time. I've put an insane amount of hours into this game. I bought it on itch.io like a year or 2 ago and put it on my phone because you can grab the APK from the itch.io. It was like my go-to exercise game. Like, whenever I was biking, indoors, mind you, I would be playing this game, and it was excellent for that. And it is just an excellent game. It always kind of grabbed my attention and kept it until I was finished a run. There's an insane amount of replayability in this game. There's an insane amount of variety in this game. It's just excellent. And I think, honestly, personally, I think that Slice and Dice is as good as Balatro. I think it is. And in terms of an engine builder or a drafting game, I think it deserves as much recognition. I want to give my award for a drafting game or a deck building roguelike, if you really want to put it in those terms, to Slice and Dice, because I think it is a fantastic game, and I don't think it's really found its audience as much as it could have. It definitely has some recognition from the people who've played it, but I think that more people should try it. If you like Balatro, I think you should take a look at Slice and Dice. Your dice are built on your heroes level up and you fight monsters. It's very much a different breed, but the same DNA exists in Slice and Dice that exists for Balatro. So definitely give that a look. I want to talk about Roguelite tactics games because there were a couple of those. And I want to give, actually my award is shared in a way. Like, I really put a lot of time, put about 10 hours in Inkbound, and I thought it was a really good game. Came out from the devs who made Monster Train. Monster Train is like my favorite deck builder of all time. Inkbound, I don't hold it as high compared to Monster Train, but it's still a really good game. I know they had like a little bit of trouble when Inkbound came out because they fumbled the ball when it came to the microtransactions, but they fixed it. They made it better. Everything is earnable in game now, and I really appreciate that they took that criticism and actually tried to repair the damage that they did. Unfortunately, I do think the damage was done. I think that a lot of people after that maybe just kind of ignored it, but I really highly recommend you go and check out Inkbound. It is a top-down turn-based roguelite, and it is very good. It's a kind of hero-based. It almost feels like a turn-based Dota. It's really just about building up your character. Your progression is very satisfying, and it is actually PvE. You can play it co-op, so you can play it with a friend and fight together, and it is actually very well balanced for that. I got to play it like once or twice with multiplayer, but yeah, I mostly played it on my own, and it is very playable in that state. Inkbound is a really good game, and I think it deserves a bit more eyes basically looking at it. But it is a shared award, unfortunately, because I also put exactly the same number of hours into Shogun Showdown, and I thought that Shogun Showdown was just a stellar game. When it grabs my attention, it keeps it until I'm finished a run. It is a more like a side-scrolling positional tactics turn-based roguelite. Lots of replayability, lots of opportunities for strategy, lots of variety in the gameplay. It gives me almost Into the Breach vibes. It's a very, very polished game, and it's very well put together. Excellent design. And yeah, I put about as much time into it as I did Inkbound, and I think that it definitely deserves more eyes. I also wanted to give a shout out here to Dawnmaker because I thought this was also an excellent game. Technically a different genre, so I'm gonna go ahead and give it an award for Best City Builder Roguelite. And like, there's competition here. Like, this is the thing, is it doesn't matter how niche of an award I give to a game, there is probably competition. If DLC is on the table, I could give this to the DLC of Against the Storm, because Against the Storm is like one of my favorite games, and it's a city builder roguelite. So you know, there's always competition for any genre, but I really enjoyed Dawnmaker, and I definitely think it deserves more eyes, and I think more people should try it. If you like roguelike games, you know, permadeath and replayability and some unlocks and variety in the gameplay, then I think you would really enjoy Dawnmaker, especially if you like board games. Like, Dawnmaker has some obvious influences in like Euro games and board games in general, like a lot of worker placement mechanics in there. It's a really good game. I want to get back to Dawnmakers. Like, even thinking about it, I would like to play more of it. I think that Pacific Drive found its audience, but I don't think that enough people played it. I don't know if enough people that would have enjoyed it gave it an honest shot, but I guess I would give this my like narrative driven game award. It's a really difficult game to explain to people. Kind of an extraction game, it's kind of a horror, it's kind of a walking sim. It's all of those things. It gives the vibe of being an extraction game, but the thing is that I feel like a big part of extraction games are the risk of loss, and I never died or lost anything in Pacific Drive. I think it's actually it's kind of tricking its audience a little bit into thinking that it's a game with high risk. It's actually a lot more forgiving than at first it comes across. It gives the player a lot of tools and a lot of forgiveness and a lot of flexibility, but also kind of makes threats of, you know, like high risks and a lot of like hazards and environmental things, but it's actually a lot more forgiving and a bit more kind than that first appearance. This is a game that's going to stay with me for a very long time. I think that Pacific Drive is one of those games that you should probably look at. If you think that horror games are not for you, that's fine. Maybe don't play it, but like, it's not that horror. It's like there's no boogeymans that chase you in Pacific Drive. There's a little bit of eeriness and creepiness. It's got that stalker vibe a little bit, but in actuality, one of the amazing things to me about Pacific Drive is actually how kind it is. Like, it's not really malicious. There's just like a creepiness to it, but there's nothing out there trying to hurt you. Outside of that, I think it's got some of the best written characters I've seen in a game. I just really liked the characters. I really liked the voice actors that played them. There are characters in Pacific Drive that will stay with me, and I will actually miss them. They are so well done, and they are so well acted. I grew to attach to them before the end of the game, and their characters I wish I could spend more time with. I think those are difficult things to do in a game, and so when it happens, for me specifically, I give a lot of credit to a game that manages to pull that off. I don't think enough people have played Frog Monster, so I want to give my like first-person shooter Metroidvania award to Frog Monster. It's an amazing game. It's voxel-based, so it looks a little chunky. It's actually kind of scary. Like, there are things that actually chase you in Frog Monster, and there's some big, very intimidating looking bosses in Frog Monster that will like chase you around. But it's actually quite cute in a lot of ways. Like, it's got this very creepy, cute thing going on, and I think everything's very chunky. But it's a really good game. Actually, like, really good gunplay, really inventive and interesting, creative bosses. I'm always struck with a wow moment whenever I meet a new boss and I see what their gimmick is about, and it's like, wow, that is really cool. And it doesn't feel gimmicky. More people need to play Frog Monster. I think that maybe they did know, the devs did no favors with the name, maybe, and maybe the art style turns some people away, but I don't know. I really think that if you like any boomer shooters and Metroidvania-ish games, then I think you will really appreciate Frog Monster. It's really, really fun, and I think more people... I'd like to give my traditional roguelike of the year to Path of Acra. That's going to seem strange to some people, and I'll talk a little bit about that later, but I think Path of Acra is my standout traditional roguelike of the year. Whenever there's a new one that comes out, I always have to give it some time and give it its dues, because like coming out with a traditional roguelike is always like you're setting yourself up to be part of a niche in a way, and to have maybe a smaller audience of freaks. So I always appreciate when anyone throws their hat in the ring, and the dev for Path of Acra definitely did, and they did it well, and I really like Path of Acra, and I think that Path of Acra actually succeeded in like maybe breaking out of the traditional roguelike community a little bit, because it's not just good at being a decent traditional roguelike, it's also a very good kind of build simulator. Like it almost feels like playing a turn-based Diablo or a Path of Exile kind of game, where you're slapping together a build, and you're getting equipment, and you're building on the synergies of your character, and then you just get to go and defeat like 100 monsters, and it's really satisfying. But outside of just being a very satisfying game, it's got great tools for actually teaching the player how to play the game. I wouldn't say that there's really any or much tutorialism in Path of Acra, but there's a lot of transparency in how the game works. It's not very shy about letting you like pull up the hood and see what's working underneath. It explains everything very well. But even if you don't feel like reading all of the stats, you could just like, boot up Path of Acra and try it out, slap some stuff together and see what works and what doesn't. It's very good at that. It's very good at being a game that's fun, even if you don't fully understand it yet. And then it's a very good game for teaching you how to understand it. In terms of accessibility, I think that Path of Acra was done very well and very intelligently. It's a very deep game, very complex, but it never feels super intimidating. It only feels like a game that you could jump in and just like have some fun with. I also want to give a shout out to Rift Wizard 2, because I know that game also came out, and for me it almost got kind of like shadowed by Path of Acra, because they were similar in some ways, but I immediately kind of glommed onto Path of Acra, and I didn't give enough time to Rift Wizard 2. But yeah, there was competition for traditional roguelike of the year. I'll talk about some of the other competition in just a minute. Congratulations on actually releasing that game, Ulfsire. I really appreciate the game, and I'm looking forward to playing more of it. I do think that Animal Well found its audience, but I think it was a very good game. I think it deserves all of the recognition it's received. It's one of those special games that you get to play only once for the first time. It's kind of like one of those like Outer Wilds experiences to me. It feels wholly original. It feels like it takes the genre Metroidvania-ish experience and does something completely unique with it. It really feels like the old kind of games I used to play, freeware Metroidvanias that felt like nothing else like I'd ever played before for the first time. It's just a little bit creepy, a little bit eerie. It's very inventive. It's very creative. It strikes a vibe. I'll be frank, I'm kind of sick and tired of hearing people talk about Silksong and then not playing a game like Animal Well. If you're looking forward to Silksong, go and play Animal Well. Like that's the long and short of it. It's a very good game. That's not the dunk on Hollow Knight. I think Hollow Knight's great, but there were so many good Metroidvania games come out this year. I could easily give this recognition, this award to any number of them. There's so many amazing Metroidvania games coming out all the time. Stop waiting for Silksong. Go and play one of them. Like seriously, like it's not hard. You could like look for 2 seconds and find your next favorite Metroidvania. Like for real. Animal Well is really good. I think it definitely deserves the recognition that it's gotten and more. I think Lords of Manor is going to get my Colony Sim of the year, although it's an early access game, so that makes it a little bit more difficult. I think it's a good game now, and you could play it, and I think it's one of the most beautiful games I've ever played. And not only that, but I think it's a game that encourages the player to make beautiful looking towns and cities, and I think that deserves a little bit more recognition. There's a lot of games that that come out sort of in the same vein, where you kind of figure out how to Tetris things together in order to make a very optimally performing city, but it doesn't end up looking very normal or natural or interesting. It looks like a crammed Tesla block. You know, there's nothing interesting about it. And I think that Lords of the Manor has great tools for actually making a really pretty place. It's actually one of those games I might play purely to build a city for my own purposes, like either for TTRPGs or you know, just to make a fun looking place. I think that it's actually good for that. I'm looking forward to playing more of it for its actual like gameplay purposes. You know, I just think that the dev has done such a wonderful job to make it a beautiful looking game. Lords of the Manor is definitely a game that you should have a look at, if only to appreciate what it looks like. I didn't end up covering it, but the dev was actually very kind to give me a code for Abiotic Factor, and I did play some of it. I was never able to put a crew together to covered the best part of Abiotic Factor, which is the multiplayer, but I definitely think that Abiotic Factor is like my survival game of the year. I'm actually quite cynical and negative when it comes to survival games. I'm not a huge fan of a lot of the mechanics that make them the mainstay genre. Like I'm not a huge fan of feeding my character, watering them, crafting, base building. These are all things that kind of bore me in a lot of ways, but I think Abiotic Factor does a very, very good job of taking all of those mechanics and doing something interesting with them. And it doesn't hurt that it does it with a veneer of like a Half-Life vibe. Abiotic Factor is basically about the scientists that are left over in the Black Mesa facility when after the events of Half-Life 1, and instead of being like the gung-ho hero, you are like a weak, spongy scientist, and all you know how to do is make particle accelerators. Like, it's actually a very goofy, fun game, and I appreciate it for that, but it is also balls to the wall, difficult, hardcore kind of survival experience. Like, actually taking on monsters in that game feels very anxiety inducing. It's not until you build yourself up a little bit and get some better armor and make yourself a little safe space in the facility that you can keep coming back to, that things develop, and it is very satisfying for that. I would have loved to have covered it better, but I just was never able to really do so in the means that I think would have put the best light on Abiotic Factor. So I'm sorry about that, but I still wanted to give it a shout out and give it my survival game of the year. Best demo of the year. I think that a good demo can really shine a good spotlight on your game, and I think the Big Catch Tackle Box is a great example of that. Basically, the Big Catch Tackle Box is a game. It's like a good 7 to 10 hours long, and it shows off the major mechanics of the Big Catch, and it's amazing. You should go and try this game if you have any interest in collectathons, 3D platformers. It's actually fantastic. It's got all of the best movement tech from like all of my favorite 3D platforming games like Mario Sunshine, Sly Cooper, Ratchet and Clank. It's got wall running, it's got spin jumping, it's got sliding, Crash Bandicoot movement tech. It's got all of the movement tech that I really enjoy, and then condenses all of them and demands that you use all of them in creative ways to move around. The level design in the Big Catch is actually very difficult. Like there are moments where I'm like, wow, you really want me to do all of this? And it's like, yeah, and then you do it and you feel really good about that. It's also got this kind of interesting Wind Waker vibe where you're like moving from island to island, but it's not a sea, it's a desert, and so you have this like really interesting kind of travel system. It's a really, really cool game. It's free. It's a whole game you can play for free. And I think I'm really looking forward to the Big Catch. I think it's a game I will end up playing through. And Tacklebox did such a good job of showing it off. Yeah, I'm very excited for that. So if you haven't played the Big Catch Tacklebox, definitely do so now. So I know Shadows of Doubt came out, and I know some people were disappointed with it. I still think it's one of the most inventive and creative games I've ever played. It's certainly a genre that I don't think exists, at least not as much as I now wish it did, but the detective sim, or basically immersive sim, is now something I want to play more of, and I think Shadows of Doubt is a great start. It's an amazing game, and I definitely think it still deserves the recognition. There's a fully simulated city with people that have lives. They have schedules, they move around, they go to jobs, they do things, and one of them decides that they're going to commit a murder. The murders are basically procedurally generated. I'm still not, I think the jury's still out on that. Are they generated or are they actually pre-scripted? I'm not sure, but either way, you have to investigate said murder. You're private eye, so actually doing so is against the law, so you kind of have to work around or outside the law in order to investigate that murder, which is very interesting and kind of brings in some of the ImSim vibes where you're like stealthing around looking for clues. And then you have to string things together. Literally, you have a corkboard and you are stringing murders and clues and people and places and trying to put it all together. And you can be as in-depth about this as you want. It's a really, really good game, and it highly encourages player creativity. Like, I don't see a game like Shadows of Doubt come out very often. Certainly not one as ambitious as Shadows of Doubt, where they're trying to simulate a whole freaking city. I think it's amazing. I definitely think that it deserved more recognition, more accolades. I was very happy to discover it during one of the Next Fest, and it's a game I will definitely be coming back to for a series, probably, now that it's actually hit 1.0. I want to talk a little bit about like DLCs. There were actually quite a few DLCs that came out this year that were very good. I mentioned one of them already, but the Against the Storm DLC was actually really good. I wasn't able to cover it in time because you had to actually be quite high level in order to play it. I feel like a lot of DLCs can feel like they're slapped on and they don't really incorporate naturally into the general experience of the game. I did think that that was true for the Against the Storm DLC. However, I do think that that is also true for Factorio Space Age, and I think that Factorio Space Age was one of the best, I don't know, additions to a game I've ever played and may ever play. It's just, it kind of blew my mind. It was amazing to me to see a game that people had basically made a career out of playing. It's a ridiculously deep game, and people have played it for thousands of hours and gotten like the most out of it. And Space Age still had them rethinking how the game worked. Like, it still had them rethinking how factories should be built, what optimization means, how it all fits together. They had to rethink how to optimize, and I thought that that was just kind of amazing. I thought that Space Age felt like a very natural progression. It's not perfect. There are some things that worked and some things that didn't for me personally, and I know for others, but I still think that it's like one of the most amazing DLCs that I've ever played, because it felt such a natural progression. One of the things I think it does very, very right is it rebalances basically the entire game. And that's really cool to see. I really appreciate a dev or company looking at a expansion, an addition, a DLC from a top-down perspective and reconsidering like how is this addition actually going to work with the game. We need to rebalance everything. We need to incorporate it so that it feels like it's part of the experience. And I think that they succeeded with Space Age, and it was a very, very good experience. I really, really enjoyed Space Age. Shooter of the year, I think, probably goes to Echo Point Nova, purely by on the fact that I actually finished it and then 100%ed it, and that doesn't happen very often. It's not something I happen to do very often. It is a very, very good game. You get a really cool kind of like hoverboard, which feels really, really so much fun to fly around on your hoverboard, and the progression system is such that eventually you do basically get to go wherever you want. Like, wherever you can see, you can probably fly there with enough like clever movement tech. I think Echo Point Nova is one of the most satisfying little shooters that I've ever played. It's just so much fun to roam around, try and find stuff, take on a challenge. The challenges are very intelligently incorporated because there's so much freedom of movement in Echo Point Nova. It's difficult to then kind of demand that the player sit down and actually take some level design seriously, but it does so successfully where you are actually like expected to like use some kind of environment to your advantage and move around it intelligently and creatively. It also has some high demands in terms of like how you're shooting your foes. It's got some great progression. When you use a gun, you actually level it up, which encourages the player to swap away from something they might have used regularly. Like I really like the grenade launcher, but once I maxed it out, I was like, you know what? Maybe I'll just switch to one of my sniper rifles. I don't like the sniper rifle. I'm not very good at it, but I used it nonetheless so that I could max out its progression system. That was really cool, and I loved that they did that. The progression system is just so satisfying in Echo Point Nova, and it does a very good job of encouraging the player to keep moving forward. I'm struck with this like difficult decision. I really like UFO 50. I haven't beaten it. I'm not even technically halfway through it yet, but it's like seriously one of the best games I think I've ever played. Everything in it is fun. It feels like a game made specifically for me because I love covering new experiences. I love looking at a new experience and trying to figure out how it works, trying to figure out what the design philosophy behind it was, sort of trying to figure out what the devs' intentions were with that game, and then getting to grips with it enough that I can actually play it, and then completing it. Completing it is part of the equation, and one of the reasons I'm rarely able to complete a game these days is because they are so freaking long, and I just don't have the time. I don't think anyone really has the time. It's a very difficult thing to actually sit down and play a game until it's finished. But what I really enjoy about UFO 50 is that you could sit down, learn how to play one of the games, and complete it within a few hours. Like some of the games are like, you know, they would take you a little bit longer, 5 to 6 hours maybe, but a lot of them you could play them and beat them in a couple hours, and I really enjoy that. And so far there hasn't been a single game in UFO 50 that wasn't worth playing. Some of them I like more than others for sure, but they are all worth playing, and they are all interesting in their own way. They all succeed in doing something interesting. That's really difficult. I don't know. I would love to give UFO 50 my game of the year. Unfortunately, I have to give it to Caves of Cud. I couldn't properly put my thoughts into words in terms of what I think about award shows. I think at the end of the day, I would distill it down to this. Caves of Cud came out this year. It's 1.0 and it came out this year. And for some reason, December doesn't count. But it's not like no one was given enough notice about Caves of Cud. It's been in development for 17 years. So everyone's got a chance to talk about it now. Caves of Cud has definitely received some recognition from publications, you know, PC Gamer, Rock, Paper, Shotgun. I'm glad for that, but I don't think that any award show or award system is really worth its merit if it doesn't at least mention Caves of Cud. Similarly, I think that when Dwarf Fortress came out and it didn't receive any awards from things like the Steam Awards or from Game of the Year, I think that is just a glaring indictment of that system. You have a game that has basically influenced titans such as like Minecraft and RimWorld. You have a game that is so influential it is now the DNA as part of our normal perception of games, and you are not giving that game an award when it comes out. What are you doing? Similarly, I think Caves of Cud is one of the best games ever made, and I think it is silly not to give it its dues. I have to give it my Game of the Year award. I'm sorry. Like I don't have an option here. There's no choice about it. And this is the same year that produced possibly some of my favorite games of all time. But Caves of Cud is still better than all of them. We are reaching Sisyphus levels of games coming out and trying to play them and trying to enjoy and appreciate this medium. We're at Sisyphus levels. So it seems almost pointless to me to have a Game of the Year award in the same way that it's almost pointless to have like a favorite game of all time award, which by the way, incidentally, would also go to Caves of Cud, by the way. It's really easy for me to do that. I don't know. I get a little bit cynical when it comes to Game of the Year, you know, game awards. But nonetheless, I wanted to talk about the games that I really enjoyed this year. Maybe you agree with some of them. Maybe you don't. Maybe you played some games that you think that I should have played and put on my list, and maybe let me know about those in the comments. This is it for my awards. If you enjoyed this, definitely hit the like button. Consider subscribing, and maybe let me know in the comments some of the games you played this year that I didn't mention in the list. And I'll see you all next time. See you next year as well. Happy New Year. Take it easy.